Now, last week we had the Prime Minister tell us that Britain was a Christian country. Today we have a former Archbishop of Canterbury who believes Britain is a post-Christian country. Speaking to the Sunday Telegraph, Rowan Williams, now Lord Williams, says Britain is not a nation of believers and that the era of widespread worship is over. Here's a little of what he said. A Christian nation can sound like a nation of committed believers, and we are not that. Equally, we're not a nation of dedicated secularists. It's a matter of defining terms. A Christian country as a nation of believers? No, he said. Well, is Britain Christian or post-Christian? We'll get your calls on this tonight. 0500 909 693. Stephen Green, the National Director of Christian Voice. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, how are you?
Hello there. And Keith Porteous-Wood, the Exec Director of the National Secular Society. Has he got it right, Keith?
Yes, I think he is. From the Telegraph's own poll, there were just 14% of practicing Christians. But if we take non-Christians, effectively cultural Christians of nearly 40% and non-religious of over 40%, that gives 80% on the other side of the slot. And this is being of the fence, and this has been going on for a long time.
So why do you think this is, though?
Well, I was just looking at the Church of England's recently published figures. Confirmation is a tenth of what it was a century ago. And Sunday attendance is now, from the established church, just over 1% of the population, half of what it was in 1970. So it's a long-term trend. But I think I think much more important, the disparity between that and that Britain is the only country in the world to have clerics, Christian clerics, as of right in its parliament. And I think it's about time, as we've been calling, the National Secular Society has been calling for 150 years, for that anomaly to stop, as Nick Clegg has been suggesting.
Stephen Green, Britain not a nation of believers? If that's the case, why?
Well, yes, of course we are. I mean, it's preposterous for Keith Wood there to try to get the 38% who are non-practicing Christians into his secularist camp. That's utterly ridiculous. We are a Christian nation, as Rowan Williams has said, in terms of our culture, in terms of our.
But he's also said we're not a nation of believers. The era of worship is over.
I mean, I don't think we ever have been. The Lord Jesus Christ talked about believers being salt and light, and to be salt, to be a preservative. You don't need much more than 5% in a meat product to preserve it. And I guess that's a bit the same as in society, that we've got as many as 14% who are real practicing Christians. Well, that's a bit of a bonus. But I mean, culturally, legally, literate, our literature heritage, everything.
But Stephen, you have a former Archbishop of Canterbury essentially saying that people are leaving the faith. They're leaving Christianity. Britain is not a nation of believers. The era of widespread worship is over. That's not anybody saying that. A former Archbishop of Canterbury. Is the church in trouble?
Yeah, but you could have said the same in the 17th century. He asked the question. He says, look, are we a Christian country as a nation of believers? No, he says. Are we a Christian country in the sense of still being very much saturated by this vision? It means a Christian vision of the world and shaped by it. Yes. So, I totally agree with him.
Keith?
We are a Christian country.
I think the figures speak for themselves. If I'm saying, every figure every trend figure shows massive reductions, whether you're talking about, Easter congregants or for example, they're down from over 3/4 in the last 80 years. Doesn't that mean anything? I don't know what I really don't know how else you can measure decline other than over these figures, over these kind of periods where everything is going down like that. And when Mr. Green's suggesting that they're just sort of everything's the same as it was, it doesn't make any sense at all.
I think the nearest thing that you're going to come to, like a celebration of Easter in secularist terms, is probably reading James Kirkup's blasphemous poem about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And when the secularists did that, a few dozen of them hid away in a restaurant somewhere, and
that was outside St Martin's in the Field.
And that was as many.
Can't you get anything right,
Mr.
Green? Can't you get anything right? Really, that hidden away in a restaurant. I mean, you just make it up as you go along, don't you?
You did hide away in a restaurant because you knew that we would put a protest on outside if you actually said where. If you actually owned up to where it was going to be.
St Martin's in the Fields in Trafalgar Square. I don't know how much more public than you can be than that.
Well, I don't know. No, I mean,
weren't you there?
Yes, I was there, and nobody could actually hear what they were saying. I think that the significant point found by this Telegraph poll is that a majority of people believe that Christians are not now afforded the same protection for their beliefs by the state as believers in other religions, and a majority now agree that Christians are afraid to express their beliefs, and we're finding that that Christians are being hounded out of their jobs. There was a nursery nurse the other day who was asked by a lesbian colleague what her views were on homosexuality. She responded, and she was sacked. And that is the reality of why now Christians are becoming increasingly afraid to express their faith, because they're at the risk of losing their jobs.
Could I just say that we've actually stood up for street preachers who have been denouncing homosexuality, which we don't agree with that denouncing, but we've stood up and in court for their right to do that. So we're not part of this intolerance. I think where there might be a differential is I'm not sure that the law looks upon hate speech from minority faiths with as much rigour as it does problems with others.
I'm really interested.
Perhaps a little bit of common ground between Stephen and me.
I'm really interested in hearing from you at home tonight. If you do feel that your faith, be it Christianity, another faith, is being eroded in some type of way, do you think the shape of faith in the United Kingdom is changing? The shape of it, the attitude towards it. 0500 909 693. 0500 909 693. The filmmaker and Muslim commentator Mohammed Ansar with us this evening. Do you welcome what the former Archbishop of Canterbury has said?
Good evening, Stephen. I do. I think we do need to have a bit more of an authentic debate and a discourse around what the problem is. Everybody seems to be peddling their own self-interest here, and I think it would be nice if we were able to have a bit more light than heat. On the one hand, look, I think it's interesting that the UK Anglican community, which is, let's say, around 27 million people, produces fewer weekly churchgoers than mosque attendees from 3 or 4 million Muslim population in the country. And I think over the last probably 25 years, we've seen a steady decline in Anglican weekly church attendance.
Well, you don't have to attend church to be a Christian, do you?
No, you don't. But I think one of the interesting things...
So it's a crude measurement.
Well, it might be a crude measurement, but it's a measure nonetheless. I mean, if you look at the Telegraph poll, they had, I think their first question was, they had a variety of questions, but their first question was trying to get an indication over how Christian, if you like, people felt. Now, people can define their own faiths, and there'll always be the argument of saying, well, you're trying to play a one true Scotsman test over this. But, Rowan Williams has been very, very warmly welcomed and accepted with multi-faith and interfaith communities over his tenure. And the reason is because he takes a pluralist approach. I don't understand, and I'm not sure many people will understand this idea that a secular society has to be one bereft of religion or bereft of people of faith.
I certainly don't take that view. I'm not saying that it's good or bad that Christianity has reduced. We're just talking about what the reality is.
Absolutely.
But the reality also is that Britain has a Christian constitution, and that in the coronation service, Her Majesty promised to maintain the laws of God.
I'm going to wave my white.
The coronation service was built around the understanding that Jesus Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's difficult to get away from that.
Chaps, I'm going to wave my white privilege flag slightly because you two have had the lion's share of this debate for a while now. The reality is that we live in a plural society, a multi-faith, a multi-ethnic society. I think if you listen to Tom Holland on the Marr show this morning, it's really interesting because he said that he felt, despite the fact that he didn't seem to be a believer in God, and that lack of God consciousness, I think, is a real difficulty here. He felt he was Christian because he grew up in what he determined to be a Christian society, a Christian nation, and he said it was a Christian nation because the Queen was the head of the Church of England, and our monarch and the head of the state. So we have this politicised, and I think the temptation, the danger, and the trap we have to avoid is that it becomes an intolerant form of politicised Christianity, which isn't benevolent and marginalises atheists, secularists.
But it never has done. It never has done that. Oh, my
goodness. What about the Test Acts, where you couldn't even go to university or take public office unless you were a communicant Anglican?
We're talking about the modern era, and it does not do that.
I'm really sorry. I think if you look at the facts on the ground, we've seen a significant rise in, and talking from the Muslim communities, anti-Muslim prejudice, anti-Muslim hate, attacks. Just this evening, I put on, a friend of mine put onto YouTube, and I put it onto Twitter, this a woman who had left me anti-Muslim abuse on Twitter, and she happened to leave her phone number, so I rang her up. And if you listen to those rants, they're about being a Christian nation, this conflation between Muslims and terrorism and extremism and radicalisation. And we've seen the far right rise across Europe, and they are beginning to conflate this across Europe. We've got polls between 20 and 30% in most nations now where the far right has risen. Why would it be any different in the UK? And the fact that is now becoming conflated with a highly politicised agenda. And I'm sorry to say, the PM's done a lot of good things and a lot of things which are questionable. But this marginalisation and this alienating of different communities in the UK, I think is not right. And we need to have a sensible debate about what Britain looks like outside your front door, what people look like. And if you listen to them, they are talking about different types of faith.
Yeah, but what Britain is going to look like in about 30 years' time is going to be something like, on the present rates of immigration fecundity, about 30% Muslim, which is probably the tipping point at which it's possible to get a Muslim majority in Parliament.
Okay.
So, there is going to be a time when Keith and I are going to be, merrily having this, this conversation as in the middle of a Muslim takeover.
We're going to have to leave it there. Mohammed and Stephen and Keith, thank you very much indeed.